Hi everybody, I'm Tim from troutandfeather.com, and hold on because this is a video all about fly tying vices. Gosh, there are so many different areas that we can explore for this one, but basically, if you are a brand new fly tyer and you're thinking about investing into a vise, you have found the right spot. Or if you're kind of jumping from that first vise and you're saying, gosh, I want to kind of step up a little bit, what should I be thinking about? This is a great video for you. During this video, I am not going to make any specific recommendations about X vise. That's not what this is about. Instead, this video is just meant to help you explore all the differences, similarities, and just kind of see some of the different styles of vices out there and just try to figure out exactly which one is going to match up with you. Before we get started, I always say that if you ask 10 people for their recommendation of a vise, you're going to get, probably 19 different vices. And that is the truth because it's such a very personal decision, and I hope to help make it an easier one for all of you. Stay tuned. In 1989, that was the year that I was in 4th grade, and it was also the year that my life kind of altered its course for the better. It was the year that I fell in love with fly tying. And this is the first vise that I used that year. So this is basically the vise that helped to fuel that addiction. Now, as you can probably guess, this vise started off for that first year, and I went through a bunch of flies on this vise. And I stuck with it for X amount of years. But eventually, it was time to kind of move on from that vise. Now, you're probably asking why. We'll get there. But let's kind of take a step back. What's the purpose of a vise? It's really, really simple. It's meant to hold your hook secure. That's it, nothing else. We have lots of different ways we can do that. We have lots of different tools that we can do that with. But the most common is this fly tying vise. And there are so many differences among all the vices, on today's market. Now, knowing that, let's first just take a quick peek at what I saw when I was tying a fly back on this vise, more than 30 years ago. Here is a quick peek at my first vise. So I started tying in 1989. This vise was gifted to me then. At that point, it had already been used, I'm sure, by multiple tyers. It was at least 20, possibly 30 years old. Yeah, it's definitely seen its use. So let's go back to a vice's function. Did it hold a hook in place? We'll say adequately, as long as it was kind of an average size trout fly. Once I got into larger streamer hooks, saltwater stuff, once I got into smaller tricos and little midges, then it started to kind of deteriorate a bit. Because if you look at it now, this is, I believe, a size 14 jig hook, and I have lots of access to the rear of the hook, to the bend. You could see kind of underneath. Everything's pretty good. But then when I started to realize, whenever I got to either really large hooks or really small hooks, I would have to open my jaws and kind of place them further in. So there was basically more metal on metal contact. So did I want to upgrade? Sure, absolutely. Now let's talk about some other differences from this vise that you'll see throughout this video. And it's going to be a simple one. There weren't a lot of options with this vise. Could I rotate it? I could not. Did I have this giant range of hooks that I could tie in? I didn't. Did I have other options? I mean, like color options with the vise? Of course not. Come on, this was a free vise. And trust me, I was not complaining at the time. The one kind of perk of this, it came with a C-clamp, so I was able to move it around based on my tying station, and I could also adjust the height, so I could go vertically higher or lower based on my tying needs and based on the tying station, but that was about it. So now, let's kind of continue down the path of some more, we'll say, modern vices. So this one was my vise for a few years anyway. It really did a relatively good job. I knew there were better vices out there, but I wasn't just completely trying to go off the deep end and say I had to get another one. But a couple years later, one of my friends, Jerry Roderberger, said, hey, I've realized that you're always talking about this notion of a rotary vise. I have one that rotates. Would you like it? I was like, absolutely. I don't know the exact model, but it was an Orvis vise. It was still fixed. It was a cam model, and it would rotate. So I could see the whole way around the fly, and I thought that was just awesome. But then, like many of you, I started reading about more fly tying vices, and I started seeing advertisements, and I realized that if I was really going to be a fly tyer, I had to have a full rotary vise that would just rotate 360 degrees, just completely parallel to the floor. So I did what any teenager would do. I saved up my money, and on around my 15th birthday, I went to the Neshannock Creek Fly Shop and I purchased my first full rotary vise, the Renzetti Traveler. Geez, I was just in love with that vise. I still remember getting home. I had the C-clamp, setting it up at my little fly tying station and just putting a hook in and just watching that hook shank. Just as it spun around, it just stayed perfectly parallel to the floor. I thought that was just the coolest thing in the world. And trust me, that vise and most full rotary vises that you could purchase even today will probably last for the rest of your life. But what about the notion of upgrading? Or what do I even mean when I say full rotary? Because there is kind of a lot that's unknown about vises. So what I'm going to do is share with you kind of the four, I don't want to say four main styles of vises, but the four styles of vises that I have the most experience with. We're talking about something like a cam lever full rotary. That'll be one style that I'll show you. Then from there, we'll talk about the notion of a vise that we'll call it a tension vise or one that has a lever. From there, I'm going to show you a complete system that's called the Norvise system, which is kind of on its own. And then we'll end with that fourth style, which we will just call the travel series of vises. Now, the key to all of this is understanding that, geez, all these vises can hold a variety of different sizes. Some have more or less access to the rear of the hook. They come in different colors. They come with kind of built-in accessories. You can add on accessories. Some are meant to speed up the process. Some are really easy about putting the hook in. Others are a little more complicated. So what I'm going to do is just kind of break that down within each of those four styles, give you some pros, give you some areas to think about, but most importantly, as I go through these four different styles of vises, say to yourself just some key questions. What sizes of flies do you tie? Are you really just a trout fly tyer, streamers, muskie, saltwater? Think about those sizes first, because that vise should really just kind of hinge upon that decision. Whenever I go back to that first one that I tied on, geez, this vise, it was great for a size 12 trout fly. It worked really well. If I tried putting a size 24 or size 22 in there, it was not going to hold that well. And then if I had a giant saltwater hook, I couldn't even get the jaws open enough to get that hook in there. So it did not tie a great range. But if all I was going to be tying were size 12 March Browns, this vise probably would work for the rest of my life. Gosh, it's probably 60 years old now. So let's change the camera angle and go through these different styles of vise. The first style of vise that we're going to tackle here is really going to be twofold. We're going to talk about the notion of a cam lever style vise with also kind of full rotary capabilities. So we're going to be talking about vises like this one right here. This is called the Stanford Transformer. Some other vises that I can kind of really recommend in this category include the Renzetti series, especially the Renzetti Traveler. That was my first kind of high-end vise that I ever tied on. The Stanford Elite, and also another series called the Peak Vise. So those are all what we call cam lever vises. And what do we mean by cam lever is really simple. So we have our jaws of the vise right here, and we have an ability to open and close those with kind of, we're not going to say really significant tension. So I can place a hook within these. So I have a larger streamer hook right now. I'm going to tighten my jaws against that hook until they're relatively tight, but I can still move the hook. And then to kind of further tighten things down, I'm going to grab this cam and pull it up. And now I've significantly tightened this hook. Now you can get to points where you determine if you want to just tighten it partially or just halfway, then you could really crank down the cam lever, but that's completely up to you. And it also, most importantly, depends on the manufacturer recommendations. So this is really the cam part of this series. And it's a really, a great system because they have just really great holding power once you have everything locked in place and locked down tight. Now you're probably seeing some other stuff on this vise, so I'll talk through this vise, then I'll talk about some positives and some areas to kind of think about if you're going down this route. So this one is the Stanford Transformer. What I love about this vise, it's very easy to kind of place a hook in the jaws, as you saw, tighten, loosen, get it in there until it's firm, tighten the cam, and then you're off and tying. This one has some other little adjustments. So for instance, it's got this little knob here, and that's a little knob where you can hang your thread on to have it rest if you're in the middle of a pattern. It also has a material clip here, and that's something that you can just say you have an extra long material, a thread, a wire, you can pull it back, kind of lock it in place. This is basically just a spring. And then you can see over here there's a lever. And what that lever does, if I loosen my vise, it allows me to spin my vise. I can have it so it's completely loose and it can just spin freely, or I can have it so it's, relatively, we'll say relatively tight, where I can turn it and just kind of lock it in place and it just stays there, or I can truly, almost the whole way, lock it down. So those are some kind of perks of this vise. Now, I did talk about the notion of a full rotary vise, and let's kind of discuss that as well, because what's great about many of today's vises, you're able to rotate them so you can see the hook from various angles. And that's something I absolutely believe is a necessity with vises today versus my original one. But when we talk about the notion of full rotary, what that basically means, and I'll put this streamer hook back in. So if my hook is coming straight out from the main body of the vise, and it comes straight out, and I have it really basically just perfectly parallel on that area to the floor, whenever I turn it, you can see there's very little movement of my hook. Try to do that with other vises and the hook will be all over the place. But what's great about full rotary vises, most of them come with this little material clip that kind of swings out, and as you're tying, say you tie in some chenille. You can lock that chenille in place, wind your thread forward, put a half hitch, then have your bobbin kind of hang over this clip, which is going to be on my right side of this vise, and then you can hold on to the chenille and turn your vise, and the chenille will kind of magically work its way up towards the eye of the hook. So that's kind of we'll say the benefit of a full rotary vise. Whenever I first got my Renzetti Traveler, I was just amazed at how it just completely sped up the entire process and really made tying so much fun for me. Now let's talk about some we'll say perks of the cam lever and full rotary style vises. I mean, number one, they have really great holding power because once you have this cam lever locking things in place, that hook is in there. As I always say, make sure your hook is not too close to the edge of the jaws. Just really look through your directions, contact the manufacturer so you can figure out the perfect hook placement. Most of these are easily adjustable for right hand versus left hand tying, as this one is right here. And there are also other adjustments. I can adjust the height of this vise. It can go higher. It can't go any lower than it currently is, so I'd have to adjust my seat. Most of them come with a relatively uniform stem, so I can place it in a C-clamp or a pedestal base. The other nice things about these in terms of their adjustment, say it's not critical for me that this turns and that these jaws are straight out from the main section of vise. Maybe I want them in a different angle. I can adjust that really easily. So that's a nice perk there. And I kind of have mine just tightened almost the whole way down so it allows me to do that. So those are some of the really nice adjustments that they have. You can also customize many of these, and whenever we talk about customizing them, we can change the color. In some cases, there are some vises out there where you can buy different colors. I don't believe the Stanford Transformer comes in that. But you can also, and this is kind of an important one, you can change the jaws. In fact, this is kind of a teardrop style jaw that the Stanford has, and they also have kind of a more traditional jaw in their Stanford Elite. I like that jaw, but it doesn't tie really fine flies. This one does, hence why I prefer these jaws. These are in fact my favorite jaws in fly tying. And the other great thing about it, there's other adjustments like the system itself. Now this vise is called the Stanford Transformer. It's definitely my favorite vise to tie on. And what's great about it, it transforms. I can basically take this head off and I can place a streamer head on or a tube fly head on, just as simple as you just saw me do that. So these are really nice vises, the cam lever and the full rotary style. Now let's talk about some downsides of them, potentially. Sometimes the jaws tend to hold a less range of a size of hooks. So for instance, as I mentioned before, this set of jaws is for smaller size hooks. We're talking like down to size maybe 28, down to those 30s, up to maybe the higher aughts, or say sizes 4, somewhere around there. Maybe it's got a little bit more of a range than that, but I tend to tie this on, we'll say, smaller size trout flies. Versus the base Stanford jaws that are found in the Stanford Elite. Those are more for like medium-sized trout flies down to saltwater size flies, kind of medium-sized saltwater sizes. Then there's streamer head, that's for like the larger ones. And what you'll start to notice if you go to various websites of, we'll say the vise companies, and you take a look at their range of hooks for these cam lever style jaws, you'll notice it tends to be a smaller range. So kind of keep that in mind. Now, if you're really a niche tyer, then you really want to figure out what size hooks are you truly supposed to be focused on. And that will really help guide your decision for your vise. And then finally, probably the most important one whenever it comes to this style of vises, there's a bit of a learning curve to placing your hooks in the jaws. So for instance, whenever I teach a beginning fly tying class at my school, the first vise that I had for these students, gosh, it was a cam lever vise. I won't tell you the brand or anything like that, but it was so confusing for them to kind of turn it one way, turn the dial the other way, and then hit the cam, and they would get everything ready. They'd start to tie on their thread, and the hook would just completely fall down because it was so tough to adjust. In this case, it's not that difficult because I can simply just tighten that until it's firm against the hook and then operate my cam and it's ready to go. But kind of keep that in mind. There is a bit of a learning curve to using this style. Once you figure it out though, you are off and running with the cam lever style. And again, if you can also kind of pair that with a full rotary, without a doubt, go for it. You are gonna really just appreciate this style of vise. For our next style of vises, we're going to call these either the tension or the lever style. The vise that I'm going to be demonstrating with is a Stanford Cayman. Other popular vises in this area include the Regal series, and also there's many off-brands out there, but they are nowhere near the quality of a Stanford Cayman or of a Regal. They still work and they're great vises, but now let's get into why these vises are so popular. Well, we call them a tension or lever style because they have this lever here on one side of the vise that you pull and it opens the jaws. So you can probably see right there as I'm depressing the lever, the jaws are opening. What is just great about this is it is extremely fast to use. In fact, this is one of the main vises I love to recommend for beginners. This style, this tension or lever style, because there are no adjustments. They don't have to figure out exactly how open or how shut the jaw should be before they place their hook in it and then clamp everything down with a cam. In this case, it's just pull, open, place your hook in, and you're off and running. Simple enough. Some other things that I like about this is that, at least in the case of this Cayman, this lever can be adjusted for either a right hand or a left hand tire. So keep that in mind. There is a little adjustment down here that you can transfer this over. You'd have to double check on Regal. I'm not 100% sure. Then speaking of adjustments, there are tons of them on this style of vise. For instance, I can adjust the height of the vise if I want to do that. I can adjust the angle that this rests at, which is super nice depending on what I want to do. Say I want to use this kind of like a rotary style vise. I can make it straight. I can unscrew this, and now I have it rotating, very similar to a rotary style vise. So this one is rotary-ish, but I would not necessarily call it that. Now, the other kind of added perk of this is you're able to customize a lot of these vises. For instance, with the Regal series, they offer various colors, which kind of makes it cool. I don't believe Stanford has colors out yet. Who knows what they're going to do in the future. But again, main perks, you are able to see entirely around the hook whenever you're tying. That's a great thing. You might hear this one clicking as I turn it. There's one spot where it kind of clicks in place, but there's really ball bearings going on in this one. We have all this stuff kind of helping us to keep that hook under just great tension. The other beauty of this vise is that, and one of the main reasons I originally got it, it can tie between sizes 28 up to a 5/0. So we're talking really small with that size 28 and really large up to that 5/0, kind of saltwater style. If you're able to see these jaws here, you might be able to see there's kind of a little indentation there, and that's a spot where when you get to those larger hook sizes, you open it up, you place them into that indentation, and then it really helps to lock that hook in place. Now, the one thing I will tell you about this vise, whenever I got this vise, I remember just telling everybody, this is the last vise I'll ever tie on, because it was just that incredible to me. Spoiler alert, it wasn't the last vise I ever tied on, but I can promise you I still tie on it to this day. I love this style of vise, and there are many tiers out there that this is the only style they will ever choose. However, let's talk about kind of another side of this vise. Are there some downsides? Yeah, absolutely. I can tell you with some of these, when they're under extreme tension, they can be difficult to open. I know whenever I've been completing demonstrations at various fly tying events, people walk by, they're dying to see this vise, and they go to open it and they say, geez, that's really difficult. So kind of keep that in mind and see if you can try one first to make sure that's something you're able to do. Next, whenever you're tying, if you're thinking about rotary speed, in my mind, these do not have that same speed. That's nowhere near the speed of a true rotary vise. So whenever I think about the Stanford Transformer, the Renzetti, the Vise, it is much faster to crank out flies on that style vise versus this one. And then finally, something that's happened to many tires over the years, whenever you put a hook in here, it is under extreme tension. So what I always recommend is make sure you read the manual first to really understand exactly where you should be placing that hook in these jaws, because what some vices that have just such extreme tension are kind of known to do, if you leave your hook kind of out closer to the tips of those jaws, you can walk by later and it's gone. It's magically disappeared. That hook has pinged away. That can be really dangerous as a tire, especially if as you're tying it's close to the edges and it pings out and it hits you in the face. So really keep that in mind. They're under just significant tension whenever they're locked in the jaws here. Place that hook accordingly where the manufacturer recommends. So that's just a quick overview on the tension or lever style of vices. Next up, we have the Norvise. And to me, this one's almost in a category of its own. Without a doubt, this is what I would call a full rotary vise. But this is really a system, so kind of keep that in mind because, gosh, it is a funky looking contraption. To tell you just a little bit about it, first of all, be careful. There's this group of people I call Norvise Nation out there. I mean, there are people that absolutely love the Norvise. This is the only vise they will ever use. Then there are many others out there that look at it and say, this is the only vise they will never use. So, be cautious of that. People are very passionate either way with the Norvise. I can tell you I've had positive experiences with it and with the individuals that own it. The original owner was Norm Norlander, just an exceptional tire, an absolute great person. Then it was taken over by Tim and Tyler O'Neill. They are two individuals I call friends. So kind of understand that it is kind of a smaller group in a sense whenever we think about Norvise as a company. But let's talk about Norvise as a fly tying vise and as a system, because that's what we really have going on. You see the vise right now, but it's on a board that is kind of sold by Norvise. There's a stem off to my right side, and there's a Norvise bobbin hanging on that stem. So we'll kind of get into a few of those things here. But the gist is relatively simple. It operates mainly like other vices we've already discussed. I have the ability to kind of pop this out, and I can rotate it 90 degrees and lock it in place there, here, here, and here. I also have something that I can adjust. This is kind of a tension, which it'll allow me to turn it with really under a lot of tension, or I can loosen it and then I can spin it with that full rotary style that we all love. Whenever I think about how do we use this in terms of hooks, well, it's going to be similar to that cam style that we just talked about. We have the ability to open and close the jaws with this screw, and then we can lock that hook in place. So that's kind of the overall system for it. Whenever I place a hook in there, I'll show you just how this kind of looks going on. I'm going to open the jaws and kind of lock them in place. They tend to recommend to keep your hooks really just coming straight out from the vise, so it looks a little bit lower in there than typical. And then whenever I have it locked in place, it's now locked. And I pull this out and loosen this. You can see this thing can really spin at high speeds. So that's kind of the overall background and kind of getting used to the Norvise. Now let's talk about some positives with it. Without a doubt, the main one is it is full rotary. You can see it. You see it in action. Easy to decide there. You can customize it. You can get various jaws for the Norvise. You can also buy different colors of it. I believe they have a tube fly system as well. So there are some nice ways that you can kind of change things around a bit. In terms of adjustments on it, there's not too many that you can make. I believe I have an older model. Maybe there's some different looks to some of the newer models, but at least on this one, I really can't adjust its height too much. It's very smooth to use. It operates relatively like a traditional vise, even though it doesn't look like that. You can buy a traditional head for it, though. This is the Norvise system. If you're going to use the Norvise system, you might as well go for this one. But there is another place for a more traditional head that can be added to this one. So kind of some downsides in a sense. The system does require kind of an investment, at least an upfront investment, because if you want to get everything for it, we have the vise, we have a bobbin system, you can buy the table itself or this little kind of pad where it rests on. It's a little bit more than, we'll say, a traditional investment with a fly tying vise, so know that. The other thing that kind of, some people bring up occasionally is once you have a hook in place, depending on how low it is in these jaws, it is tough to kind of have access completely around the hook. So keep that in mind, especially depending on how they recommend you place the hook within the jaws. Do I still use mine to this day? Because I have a very popular review video of the Norvise out there. I get that question all the time. And the answer is, yes, I do use mine. Not to tie on as much as I did in the past. I love to use this when I'm making dubbing brushes. It makes that process really, really easy. So this is kind of the third category. We'll call this the full rotary and the Norvise category. Look, they get a category of their own. The last style of fly tying vise we'll discuss is kind of a niche one, and that's the notion of a travel vise. Now this vise here is the Stanford Airone, spelled A-I-R-O-N-E, could be Air 1, I have no idea. And what's great about this is the size. I mean, the dimensions, once it's folded up, and this thing takes less than a minute to basically get into shape, it goes down to basically 6 inches by 4 inches by about an inch wide. We're talking 15 by 10 by 2 centimeters. And to put that in perspective, I have an iPhone. I mean, you can see it's just a little bit larger than a cell phone once it's fully compact. So that's kind of the perk for it. If you're thinking about, gosh, I want to travel, I don't have a lot of space, I don't have a lot of room, but I want to bring a small vise, travel vises may be for you. So whenever you're going to purchase them, what are some things you should focus on? Well, I mean, number one, let's take a look at the style and how we can customize them. For this Stanford Airone, it's got what we call that cam lever. So we adjust it, we can kind of lock the hook in place with this, kind of tighten it, and then use the cam to fully lock it in place. This does have an adjustment, it will turn around that way. I can adjust the height just a little bit. So that's nice. There are some adjustments for this one and for some of the other travel vises out there. What are the size ranges for the hooks? Now, what's nice about this one, the reason I chose this travel vise is that it comes with the Stanford 2 jaws. And this is basically the same jaws that are found on the Stanford Elite vise. That's a good thing. That tells you it's a quality set of jaws. I mean, most travel vises, they kind of have, well, I say cheaper jaws, but the quality's not always there. So I would focus on the jaws next. Third, what's its overall size? I mean, I showed you what this one's like. I think of a vise like the the Renzetti Traveler as a travel vise, though it's definitely a lot longer. It's lightweight, but maybe you don't have the space to kind of cram it somewhere. Maybe you do. Then next, are they simple to put together? This one, definitely simple once you kind of unfold it or fold it back in place. Comes with an Allen key, easy to use. Some of the other ones out there are a little more complicated. Some, like that Renzetti Traveler, less complicated. This one's easy to convert left hand to right hand. Basically, you just turn the vise whichever way you want. And then finally, kind of the most important one to me is the notion of stability. And that's kind of the one area that tends to lack whenever we think about travel vises, especially those with a pedestal. This one has kind of a plastic pedestal that it's associated with, and it's great if you're leaning forward, kind of to my right, but if you ever kind of rock to the left, it will rock when you're tying, and that can be very frustrating. Sometimes I'll put some tape and I'll just tape the base down to the table where I'm tying, just so I know it's stable and it doesn't frustrate me. So keep that in mind with some of these travel vises. If you don't have a stable base to them, it could drive you crazy. And that's something to say, geez, I want a travel vise, but maybe I can't live with those, the downsides of them. But all in all, if you have a need for a travel vise, definitely look into it. There are a number of them out there, though, again, it's kind of a niche thing. Some will have some more kind of accessories and some features than others, and you just have to kind of know exactly what you want and kind of why you're buying that style of vise. We've just talked about the 4 main styles of vises that I have the most experience with. So where does that leave us? Well, I think it's pretty simple. It's now time to kind of just jump in and say to yourself, which direction do I want to take? And I would recommend by first starting with your budget. Figure out that number that you plan on spending and then just stay around that number, because once you hit around $125 to $150 and above, most of those vises are really going to be quality tools. That's a really great thing for all of us. But set your budget, then just start your research out. Figure out all the vises that are around that number and start to separate them and say, what style do they fit in? What's their range of hook sizes? What kind of options do they have? What's the finish on them? Is one prettier than the other? Because that is something that matters to a lot of people. Do you want a pedestal or a C-clamp? Think about your tying station. Is it going to be fixed in one spot forever, or are you going to be moving it around? Is this something you're going to be traveling, taking on the road, taking on trips with you? So we have lots of kind of questions to ask ourselves as I help to kind of push you in those different directions as we are learning about those different styles. But remember, at the end of the day, the job of the vise is just really simple. It's meant to hold your hook securely. Once you've hit a price range of around $150, nearly every vise out there is going to do that, as long as you have it paired with that appropriate sized hook. So please keep that in mind once you start all that initial research. Now, one final thought that I always have whenever it comes to this is asking a friend based on their opinion of a vise. But as I mentioned at the beginning, be careful with that. A vise is a very personal thing. If you ask me now if I would recommend my first vise, I would say to all of you, absolutely. I loved it. It got me hooked on fly tying. Is it a really competent vise that's going to hold all of your hooks securely? Probably not. But I'm attached to this vise because it was my first one. Know that there's many fly tyers out there that only have experience with one or two vises. So they have a history with that vise, so naturally they're going to recommend it. Instead of just saying, do you like your vise? Try to probe them a little bit more. What kind of flies do you tie in that vise? What kind of problems have you had with the vise? What do you really like about it? If you could get another vise, why would you get one? What kind of options would you have on that vise compared to the one you're using right now? By probing them just a little bit, it will allow them to just think a bit more critically about their vise because, geez, there are so many vises on the market today. And if you go on social media and you see somebody who's been tying on 50 different vises, can they really have that much experience with all those vises? Geez, no way, unless they work in a fly shop. But even, geez, most fly shops today still can't carry that just entire range of vises. So by all means, just try to reach out to a number of different individuals, especially on social media, to see if they can kind of help you out. You can find me on Instagram, I'm on Facebook, I'm even on Twitter now, and I love to interact with people. And I can tell you, one of the main topics people love to ask questions about are fly tying vises because the options just appear endless. So by all means, reach out to a bunch of people whenever you see a vise that you're interested in and see what kind of feedback you can get from them. Before going out and purchasing a fly tying vise, if you're interested in kind of learning more about some of the vises that I featured in this video, look down below in the description and I have review videos for many of them. For most of those vises, I tied on them for, we'll say, 2 to 3 fly tying seasons before I made that review video because I wanted to just learn a little bit more about the vise before I shared it on my YouTube channel. But once you do go out and purchase a vise, and for all of you out there that have had really positive experiences with a certain vise, by all means, go down below in the comments section and share that vise for others to learn more about. But don't just share the name of the vise. Instead, tell what you like about that vise because that will really help that decision-making process for others. And for all of you that are stuck and you just can't figure out, geez, what am I supposed to do with a vise? Because there's no perfect vise out there. Well, you can do what a couple of my buddies did. Both Charlie Heathcote and Doc Bull grabbed a pair of vice grips, found a way to make this into a fly tying vise. And it holds hooks pretty well. So, hey, you can try this too. And who knows, maybe it'll work out for you. Well, with all that said, thank you so much for watching this video on fly tying vises. If you'd like to watch more fly tying and fly fishing videos, you can check out my website, which is troutandfeather.com. I have nearly 300 videos over there that I'm sure you can connect with a few of them. And once you're over there, you can sign up for my email updates newsletter. It comes out about every month. Just put your email address in over there and you will receive tons of fly tying and fly fishing tips and tricks on a regular basis. If you're into social media, you can find me on Instagram, on Facebook, and now even on Twitter, and I'd love to connect with you there and just continue this discussion. If you have any questions or comments, you can also email me at tcammisa@gmail.com. And thank you everybody for all the subscribes, all the likes, just all the YouTube love. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing many of you soon.